Hey everybody, I hope you've had a good weekend and a good first week in English composition. I have a few things to go over in our second week here. So let me get started. I will share my screen and I will pull up PowerPoint that I have created. Now, I will actually be sharing this on Canvas. However, I don't want to just plop a file down and say nothing about it. So I'm just going to go quickly through this and just explain a few of the slides. So as we read in chapter 2 this week, you're doing the whole chapter, and the chapter's related to understanding rhetoric. So we're going to cover stuff like rhetorical situation, rhetorical appeals, and rhetorical fallacies, both in chapter 2, and then I'm also asking you to read in chapter 5, I think sections 5.3 and 5.4, and those cover rhetorical appeals and rhetorical fallacies. And this is all important information that I'd like you to know. So just kind of to recap what rhetoric is all about, it's important to understand the definition. So I have the definition up here of rhetorical, because when I say rhetoric and I'm talking about it in classes, students are usually think about rhetorical, especially as it relates to rhetorical questions. So we know that a rhetorical question is one that's asked in order to produce some kind of an effect or to make some kind of a statement, rather than actually gaining information or getting some kind of an answer. But when we use the term rhetorical, it's actually, we are thinking more, something, of course, concerned with the art of rhetoric, as it says here in this definition, but also something that's expressed in terms intended to persuade or to impress. So rhetoric is just, well, what is it? It is the art of speaking or writing effectively. So in this class, we are learning the art of writing effectively. If you go on and you take some kind of public speaking class, you're going to learn the art of speaking effectively. And maybe some of you were in debate club in your high schools, so you may be familiar with this whole idea of rhetoric. It's the way that we use words in order to be effective, but also the way that we can persuade or impress our audience. So we're going to repeat over and over again these ideas relating to rhetoric and the rhetorical situation. You'll probably get tired of it, but you'll see in your book that there are 5 key components of rhetoric, and I believe this is in chapter 2. So here we have context, purpose, audience, tone, and genre. I'm not going to go through the explanations because I think the text actually does a fantastic job of explaining the variety of things that come together to form the rhetorical situation. But I do love graphics, so I put that graphic up there, and that's kind of a variation of the graphic that's used in the textbook. Here is another one. And this is from a handout called The Rhetorical Situation. And this is a little bit of a Venn diagram. I'm kind of nerdy that way. I like Venn diagrams. I think they're kind of cool. So here we have 3 things that come together, right? We have circles of writer and subject and audience. Those are the 3 things that are interacting, right? When you are writing something, you are the writer. You are writing the subject, the thing, right? And of course, you're putting it out there, you're putting it on paper, it's not staying in your head. So there is some kind of an audience. It may be a true audience, an actual physical being, like you write your papers and I'm reading them, or your classmates are reading them, but you could also have what's considered an imagined audience. When we write down to a writing task, or we're given a certain rhetorical situation, there are so many things that are coming together and so many things that we are thinking about that, it's more subconscious. We aren't sitting out and saying, well, who's my audience and what am I going to write and all that thing, right? So there are all these multiple things that kind of come together. We have the writer and the speaker, right? We have the audience, whether real or imagined. And of course, we have the purpose. What is the reason for writing, right? There is this purpose. What are you seeking from the audience? You have some reason behind wanting to write. We have exigence, which is kind of a fancy word for your motivation. It's similar to purpose, but not exactly the same. We have, of course, the subject, and that's related to context. Context, who's discussing this? Where and when is this an issue? So kind of all the various things that are going on underneath is that context. And then, of course, we have genre, how the subject, how the topic that you are writing about, how it's presented to the audience. So in this class, we are primarily focusing on academic writing as our genre, at least for the first two essays, for the rhetorical analysis and for your larger research argument essay. However, when we move on, later on in the semester, we have that recasting project, and I'm going to bring this up probably every week, just because I'm excited about the recasting project. But the recasting project is this opportunity to kind of branch out into a different genre. So we won't be specifically doing academic writing. We're going to put it out there for more public consumption. So yeah, genre is the thing. And of course, you see right here in the middle is the text, that which has been written. So that's another graphic for you to absorb. It's similar to some others, and yet another graphic. So here is something that we call the rhetorical triangle, and you may have seen this or heard about it before. And this is something, this graphic is kind of related to the rhetorical appeals that you read about in chapter 5. So writers and speakers persuade in three main ways. They use ethos, logos, and pathos, right? So ethos is the appeal to credibility, logos is the appeal to logic, and pathos is the appeal to emotion. So this triangle just kind of shows you how those three appeals are related to those three main things that we saw in the previous slide: the writer, the subject, the audience. Here they use context instead of subject, but you see that writer and ethos are related. And there are some questions here. Who are you? As a writer, you're building trust and you are establishing authority or establishing credibility. So ethos is a very important thing for you as a writer. Why are you confident to speak about the issue? Logos is related to context or the subject, that is the words that you're using, the support, the evidence that you have, any counter arguments, and any arguments that you use in your writing. And then lastly, audience and pathos are connected here because you are trying to provoke your audience with some kind of reaction. You want them to have some kind of an emotional awakening. Yeah, so you use that appeal to emotion to get your audience to embrace your message. And you'll see this a lot in advertising. So that's the rhetorical triangle. Next, we have the rhetorical appeals, as I said, logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos is the appeal to logic. You've got to convince your audience that the information you're presenting is well researched and also worthy of their time. So you'll use facts and figures, statistics, etc. Big time evidence, right? And we use that a lot in our research papers. Ethos, the appeal to ethics or the appeal to credibility. So here you're convincing the audience that you're credible as a speaker or as a writer and that your information is also credible. So you're going to be professional, you're going to use professional tone, have an awareness, use notable sources, experts in their field or celebrity status, that kind of thing. And then pathos is that appeal to emotions. So you want to convince your audience by making them feel something. It could be anger, it could be pity, compassion. Humor is a big one, as you'll see. I have a video that you'll be watching. Joy is another, frustration, so on and so forth. And then I'm just going to hit the highlights of fallacy. I actually found a really cool website this morning, just completely by chance came across on my Twitter feed. So anyway, what is a fallacy? And a fallacy is an error in logical reasoning in an argument or in a persuasive text. It can be deceptive or misleading argument. We call that a sophism. And it's important to note that fallacies are not the same as factual errors. And here is a little chart here. So we have the fallacy here. 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Chewy brand gum. So that would be an example of a fallacy. And let's see, actually appeal to authority. And a factual error would be chewing gum is made out of silly putty, which we all know isn't true. So here's a list of 10 of the most common fallacies. And in chapter 5, I think 5.3, there's a big list, a chart with a bunch of them. I don't expect you to memorize these, but it is important to at least be exposed to these. If you take Intro to Philosophy, there is a chance that you may run across these again, or if you take a logic class for your quantitative reasoning requirement, you will most likely be exposed to fallacies. So it's a good idea to have a little introduction to them. And I'm not going to read through them all, but just show you the slides. And the 10 most common ones are ad hominem, which is attack against the person. We have straw man, appeal to authority, which you have to be careful when you are using the rhetorical appeals, because sometimes that ethos, the appeal to credibility, is sometimes misused so that you actually fall into the trap of the fallacy of appeal to authority. And that's asserting that something must be true because it's backed up by someone who is allegedly an authority in the subject. So we go back to that example, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend this gum. That's kind of an appeal to authority. Slippery slope is another one. Bandwagon is also quite popular. Something is said to be good or true simply because it's popular, right? Appeal to ignorance, false dilemma, hasty generalization. This one is quite common. And that happens when the conclusion is drawn based on a sample size that is too small. Oops, sorry. Then red herring and appeal to tradition, when something is claimed to be good or true because it's been that way for a long, long time. Okay, so that is my PowerPoint presentation.